The scriptures, first from Romans 12:17 to 18. Repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what's noble in the sight of all. If possible, so far as it depends upon you, live peaceably with all. James 1:22. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. And Luke 6:27 to 31. But I say to you that hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who abuse you. To him who strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your coat as well. Give to everyone who begs from you, and of him who takes away your goods, do not ask them again. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Why can't we just get along? That's how Rodney King put it several years ago after being beaten to a pulp by the Los Angeles police on the side of the road. And why do our religious conflicts seem to be used as a justification for so many of our social disturbances? What's up with all of that? Just a few weeks ago, the Upper Mainline Ministerium made a statement which was signed by 14 spiritual leaders in the area. I believe your pastor was one of them. Let me read it. Recently, individuals have defaced buildings and signs in Tredyffrin with antisemitic and pro-Nazi graffiti. These vile acts are local expressions of what has been a nationwide rise in crime, motivated by hate against others due to their religion, race, ethnicity, nationality, gender, or sexual orientation. As members of the Upper Mainline Ministerium, we are lay and ordained religious leaders committed to interreligious dialogue and cooperation. As such, we must speak out against these expressions of hate in our community, against our Jewish siblings and all those who are threatened by the violence that swastikas represent. We urge our faith communities and neighbors of good conscience to do so as well. We have the responsibility to defy the spread of the corrupt values and misinformation that motivate hate of all forms. We must teach and live out the moral courage and compassion that are at the heart of each of our religious traditions. We must humbly examine the ways our religious traditions can teach bias against people of other religions, in this case, bias against Jewish people. We must do the good, necessary, and at times difficult work of cultivating communities that honor our differences and celebrate our shared humanity. The need is urgent. The time is now. We invite you to join us. Meanwhile, if you need an historical footnote or two, consider the Inquisition, the Crusades. If that seems too ancient, then think about the hysteria over Muslims in this country following 9/11, not to mention the despicable campaign rhetoric of recent elections. What's more, there's that so-called Christian support for Israel, which is specifically grounded in the notion that supporting Israel will somehow lead to the second coming, or at least one of the various interpretations of the revelation to John. In other words, Israel is seen as a pawn in some bizarre Christian notion of its own triumphalism, not any real support of Israel's right to exist. With friends like that, who needs enemies? Meanwhile, someone is surely wondering, well, what do we do with those terrorists who come from these religious backgrounds? That's a good question. I think of it often when volunteering at Planned Parenthood. What do we do about these self-avowed Christian terrorists? Destroying property, threatening patients and staff, and even assassinating doctors. It's not just Muslims or even foreigners, you see. We have our own homegrown variety of terrorists, many in the name of religion. I remember sitting at a kitchen table down in Louisiana when I was a door-to-door salesman some 60 years ago. And I mentioned my concern to the lady of the house about the Ku Klux Klan. while her sheriff husband was polishing his gun in the next room. And she informed me that these were just fine Christian gentlemen out protecting my rights. Horsepucky. Not my rights. Do we want to be lumped in with them because we're Christian too? And in passing, I'll remind you that the January 6th insurrection had its share of so-called Christian revolutionaries that acted more like harebrained idiots than anything Christian. So yes, it's challenging. It's challenging to figure out what to do with these quasi-religious insurrectionists and terrorists, whatever their claim to identity, religious or otherwise, might be. And that's the task today. To consider our own tendency to travel through our own spooky forest of Oz. I trust you're familiar. Instead of lions and tigers and bears, oh my. Jews and Muslims and Buddhists, oh my, as we go through the forest of our existence. Yes, there are more religions that fit the theme, but they just don't fit into Dorothy's poetic cadence. What might an authentic Christian ethic be for relating to those who differ from us, whether they be Jews, Muslims, Native American spiritualists, Hindus, Buddhists, Wiccans, atheists, even Christians who seem to live in a whole different world than we do? What do we have as an alternative to demonizing, dissing, and otherwise dismissing those who are different from us in matters of faith and culture? Let's give it a go. Our first step is to know and embrace who we are. We don't need to have everyone else genuflect toward us so we'll feel all right about ourselves. That kind of Christian fragility is so silly. There's no way that it means anything to love our neighbors ourselves until we actually do respect, value, and have confidence in who we are. We don't need to invent some phony war on Christians to do this. When we're clear enough about ourselves that we can exercise the decency and thoughtfulness that's necessary to listen to others and learn from them, then we're ready for some mutual conversation and relationship. But if we're busy posturing about how we're superior, whether blatantly, passively, belligerently, or condescendingly, it's pretty unconvincing that we have anything of value to share. A corollary to this is that there is no conflict in exploring interfaith relations with the affirmation that we are Christian. Too often we reach for the lowest common denominator and pretend that, well, we're just all really alike. It's nonsense. As Christians, we do discern God's revelation in and through this one called Jesus. It's not chauvinism to declare who we are and what we believe. Such a declaration is necessary for meaningful dialogue, and it helps with our mutual exploration, as long as we don't persist in regarding wherever we sit to be the head of the table. And no, not all religions are the same. I'm not saying it doesn't make any difference what we believe, as long as we believe something. There are differences. To say that one's the same as the other is nonsense, and that's why it's good to enter into relationship. And we'll learn some stuff about ourselves in the process of learning about others. But if we represent our Christianity in a manner that disputes the integrity of someone else just because they believe differently, we undermine our own credibility. As Christians, we are not called to be right so much as we are called to be loving. If either our conversation or evangelism becomes hateful or self-righteous in the spirit, we will just have denied the Christ we claim to serve, in which case we deserve to be ignored or disregarded. Number one. Number two. Second, in trying to understand other faith traditions, let's first consider how we want them to consider ours. Jesus said, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So what is the spirit we would hope for in a Muslim or a Buddhist or a Jew or a Hindu in trying to understand who our Jesus is? And then let's afford that same respect to Muhammad or Buddha or the Torah or any other sacred font of revelation. I know that's not easy for Christians to do. I grew up hearing other Christians calling Baptists the Dunkers. And we, in turn, called the Catholics mackerel snappers. We still got the Crusades and the Inquisition embedded in our DNA. We fret over the wave of Islamic fundamentalism sweeping the world, but roll our eyes over our own wave of Christian fundamentalisms that swept the 20th century and is still wreaking havoc. We know full well in our own gut that it's easier to be self-righteous and smug than it is to be neighborly and loving. However, if we want to really explore the differences among the world's religions or consider the commonalities of our various sources of revelation inspiration, then we can't do it by denying the teachings of our own Master, who said to love one another as we love ourselves and to do to one another as we would have them do to us. Meanwhile, someone's bound to say, but what about those who try to kill us? Well, there are at least two responses. One is from Paul, when he said, repay no one evil for evil, but take thought for what's noble in the sight of all. And if possible, so far as it depends on you, live with peace with all. And remember, he actually did live in a time that was dangerous for Christians. In fact, he was one who, before his own conversion, was committed to a kind of bounty hunting for Christians. He wasn't making a statement with naivete. The second response is, that's right. What do we do with the likes of the Ku Klux Klan? What do we do with the so-called Christian identity movement which seeks the overthrow of the United States government? What do we do with the nutcases who describe themselves as super Christians and super patriots but have nothing but disdain for the rest of us? While we're bemoaning what the Muslim world is or is not doing with its own violent idiots, we must ask what we're doing with the violent idiots in our own midst who call themselves Christians. Dealing more realistically with our own kind, we may get some serious insight about what to do in relationship to those who are different from us in all those other kinds of ways. In the words of the Gospel of St. John, let the one who is without sin cast the first stone. All of which to say is, yes, it's complicated. Truly is. But let's not get stupid about it. If we want to explore the religions of the world and get better acquainted with their sources of revelation and inspiration, the least we can do is maintain our own Christian integrity in the process. Or as James put it, be ye doers of the word and not hearers only, who deceive themselves. For when we are hearers of the word and not doers, we are like those who look at themselves in the mirror, for they look at themselves and then going away immediately forget what they were like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think they are religious and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is, in a word, worthless. Now, my third point has to do with what we mean by the word love. And by the way, this may be the most important thing in my estimation that I have to say today. So if you've been drifting off, pinch yourself, pinch your neighbor, something, come awake. The modern world has pretty well messed up this notion of love espoused in the New Testament. We have made it axiomatic that to love someone or something, we will have these irresistible feelings of attraction for them. We will at least like them. So when Jesus says to love our neighbors, we have this whiplash. Love our enemies? How do we do that? How am I going to develop feelings that are tantamount to liking these people who have either done us harm, who clearly mean to do so if they get the chance? Well, let's begin with the word we translate as love in 1 Corinthians 13. The Greek word is agape. Not eros, from which we get sensual attraction, not philia, from which we get sibling or family love, but agape. That word has to do with an unconditional behavior and attitude which hasn't anything whatsoever to do with feelings or with liking someone. Do you think Jesus liked those buggers that nailed him to the cross? But he still prayed that God might forgive them, for they didn't know what they were doing. That's consistent with this agape love in the New Testament. I've wrestled with this all my life, and now. I've tried hard to like my enemies. I've tried hard to have warm feelings for people who have mocked and made fun of me, or people that I do love, or who threaten my well-being in any number of ways, but it has never happened. Seriously, when I've had reason not to like somebody, I'm not the great pretender who can claim to love their miserable backsides. However, something just occurred to me recently. Maybe we're using the wrong translation of agape. The King James Version actually comes closer in this case. It translates agape as charity. To be charitable is not to have a love affair. To be charitable is not even to like someone. It is not to have fond feelings for everyone. But you know what? Even some of the meanest, most ignorant, abusive people I've known along life's pathway, yes, even those, I do believe I can manage to care about them. Sometimes I even qualify for that myself, by myself. So here's what I offer as a better translation. To love our enemies is to care about them. That puts the situation in a problem-solving mode rather than this crazy idea that we're going to like or love them in the manner to which we have become accustomed in our modern abuse of the word love. In fact, try this take on John 3:16. God so cared about the world that God came to live among, to pitch the divine tent in the midst of this scene of chaos, war, abuse, enslavement, and generalized decadence. God so cared about the world, the cosmos, all that exists, that God sent into that hot mess the divine wisdom through which all creation had come to be in the first place, which Scripture presents as Sophia, Chokmah, the divine creative principle, the Logos, to be present as flesh, to be God's presence in its midst. This flesh was known as Jesus, and if this Jesus is embraced as our beloved one, then Jesus and his teachings become a pathway to escape from walking day after day in the ways of death. But more importantly, they become a pathway to walk in the ways of light. A pathway for living a life that is worth extending forever, and that every day can be realized as an eternal now. You see, I doubt that God was irresistible, drawn erotically to this creation. I doubt that God was committed to the opportunity for redemption simply because it was somehow a matter of family. Rather, along with some righteous anger, confusion, perplexity, and the stoning of the prophets whom God sent across the ages, God still found it possible to care about this whole hot mess called the cosmos, the world. Well, that's it. That's what I see as some basic markings for an actual Christian ethic when relating to those who differ from us. Those who differ in terms of faith community and those who differ in all kinds of other ways. First, to have a healthy enough regard for ourselves as Christian persons and as a Christian community that to love others as we love ourselves does not become an act of violence or depression because we think so miserably about ourselves and so insecure that we project that on all of them. May we have enough presence of our own to honor the presence of others. May we have the spiritual dignity to treat others, other faiths and other cultures as we want others to treat us and ours. May we do to others what we would have them do to us. Insofar as possible, let's live in peace with all. And finally, if there is no reason found to like them, to have fond feelings toward them, then we can at least care about them. Truth be told, I have some much fonder feelings for some persons of other faiths and cultures than I do of some Christians I know. Whatever, it still remains within our province to care about them enough to seek the common good. There's certainly more to being a Christian in the midst of otherness than this, but you know what? It's better than what we seem to be doing right now. Let me close with some words by Martin Luther King Jr. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love or caring about one another can do that. And then I really believe that only then can it really be well with our souls.